Greetings, class, and welcome to another lecture here in learning about SIOP, the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. This is in learning about how to teach English language learners in areas when we're studying and or when they're learning math and science and also social studies. We're going to be investigating a variety of those things throughout this entire series. Today, again, we're going to be talking about comprehensible input, which is another section out of this book here. If you don't have this book, you'll probably want to get it or something similar. This is basically the SIOP model, Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. It's not very different from regular sheltered instruction, so you may want to just go look up sheltered instruction instead of going into this book here. Today, again, we're going to be looking at comprehensible input, what it is, and comprehensible output, and what it is, and how we use that in setting up lessons. According to the authors here, which is Echevarria, Vogt, and Short, they have these nice little diagrams that they begin with every single time in every chapter. In particular, we're going to be looking at what is input, what is output today, and then some of the key factors for those areas. First thing, objective here is to talk about ways to make input comprehensible. And really all this means is to make sure that the stuff that goes into the class and to the students' environment is something that they can uptake, they can appropriate and understand and put into their language system and into further into their memory. All right, comprehensible input according to Judy Haynes. You please understand that this whole concept, comprehensible input, actually the idea, the wording of it comes from Krashen and Terrell in their theory of language acquisition entitled The Natural Approach. And so they're taking this idea and they're trying to expand upon it a little bit. They're trying to expand on it a little bit. I think they're actually changing some of it a little, which I would probably agree with. They don't do nearly enough. All right, before we go into what I think about it, let's just see what the explanation here according to Judy is. Language is not just soaked up. The learner must understand the message that's conveyed. All right, comprehensible input, a hypothesis proposed by Krashen and Terrell. He purports that English language learners acquire language by hearing and understanding messages that are slightly above their current level of language. And that was the I+1 principle. So it's input, but it's slightly above what they know, so that they can strengthen their language, move beyond that, and get to be stronger. Comprehensible input is as an English language learner may understand the message, right? Put the paper in your desk, but slightly changing the message by put the paper in the garbage. The speaker now needs to give a little scaffolding, some new information that increases the learner's language comprehension, right? In order to do this, the teacher must provide new material that builds off the learner's prior knowledge. So one element that they're adding here is they're trying to add to not only comprehensible input, not only the I+1, but I need to use background knowledge or their schema to try to pull this in, to try to help them understand this new information. And again, there is no focus on language, there's no focus on grammar or vocabulary, there's no focus on even cultural elements, right? They're just trying to provide you with the input and the scaffolding, right? When newcomers are assigned to a mainstream classroom and they spend most of their day in the environment, it's especially critical for them to receive comprehensible input. They have to understand what's going on. They have to understand the input from the teachers and their classmates. If that teacher's lecture in the front of the classroom, if that teacher lectures in the front of the classroom, English language learners will not be receiving the input. They're just going to hear gobbledygook, right? Imagine that you and your family are sent to Japan for a year. Would you be able to learn Japanese simply by sitting in a Japanese classroom? I don't think so. You certainly would not. Interestingly enough, that's part of the idea here, though, of the natural approach. You put them in the environment. Now, obviously, you are scaling back, and that's what they're talking about here. You scale it back to a level that they can understand. But you don't have to focus on language, according to them. You wouldn't unless the teacher made an effort to make the Japanese you were hearing comprehensible. And if you don't know any Japanese, there would be little chance for you to learn anything directly because they're so very different. So I think that was a bad example. But you understand the concept that they're trying to say. We reduce the language complexity and increase the low frequency items so that they can understand more. And so this is comprehensible input. So when you have a student who is out in a mainstream class, they need to have that stuff reduced. What I find interesting is that it's not going to happen in most classrooms. It's not going to be reduced, and so the students should learn how to cope in that environment, as well as the pull-outs or the push-ins programs that exist throughout the country. A pull-out program is when your students are pulled out of the mainstream classroom and put into a separate classroom where they can get the scaffolding, they can get the added help outside in a separate, smaller environment where there are fewer students, more focusing on what they need, and more focus on language development. Push-in is where a teacher actually goes into the mainstream class or to sit alongside that student to try to help them understand what's going on. All right. In addition to the comprehensible input, these guys also suggest comprehensible output, or what I would call forced output production. Forced output production, especially for those that have the rational capabilities, you can have them focus on those linguistic elements and have them to try to use them immediately. According to research, learners need opportunities to practice language at a level of English language competency, at their level of English language competency. This practice with English-speaking peers is called comprehensible output, or again, as I would say, forced output production. Many researchers feel that comprehensible output is nearly as important as input. I would agree. Cooperative learning groups are one way for new learners of English to receive plenty of understandable input and output. Here are some reasons why. I would agree that forced output production is an excellent way to increase their opportunities. Hearing it just one way is only going to give them so far. Okay, let me say this as well. Comprehensible input is necessary. It is far from sufficient. Comprehensible output is also necessary. It is far from sufficient. So we need both of these, but my thought is you're going to need more than that. Reasons why we want comprehensible output. A small group setting allows for more comprehensible input because the teacher or the classmates can modify or draft their message to the learner's needs. There's fewer people, and now I can adapt to the student's needs because that's why they're there. That's why they're pulled out, right? Speakers can more easily check on the understanding of the listener. They can stop because there's a smaller group and they're focused on them, right? They can stop. They can ask for questions. They can ask each other for questions, right? There's more of an opportunity for oral practice in class. That's part of the reason why you have the class, so you can practice, not only through listening, but also through speaking, also through negotiations. Student talk in small group is centered on what is actually happening. I missed one. There is also more opportunity for oral practice and repetition of the content information as peers help new learners negotiate meaning. Very important word in second language acquisition is the idea of negotiating meaning. Talking back and forth until you come to some conclusion as to how to say, how to iterate the intended meaning. So very important. Great thing for forced output production. Forced output production, comprehensible output, is also a great path to help students take what they've learned and put it into practice so that it can be more solidified in their mind. Personal example from me, there are many times where I had learned a new word on my own study, and I would learn a word, but I wasn't exactly sure how to use it in real life. And then I would hear somebody use that word, and I would go, bing, okay, I can do that now. And I could follow their example because I had that output. I could now do some output with it, right? So there are times where you just have the input. It's not going to be enough. Student talk in small group is centered on what students actually, on what is actually happening at the moment the task is completed. The nice thing about this idea is, if they're in a classroom and they don't understand something, that moment is lost if there's nobody there to help them. Okay? If you pull them out and you're reviewing the same materials and they have a question or problem, you can stop them right there. And that way they're not going to lose the moment. Okay? I understand the concept, but we also have something called a notebook. If you're in class and something crosses, the conversation or the lecture and you don't understand it, you write it down. And then later on, you can go ask about it. So I understand that you're in the moment and you can understand more, but you can also take notes. Right? Feedback and correction are non-judgmental and immediate. Feedback and correction are non-judgmental and immediate. Yes, it's immediate. Yes, it's non-judgmental. The main idea here is to keep the affective filter in a good position. Not too high, not too low. I oftentimes will tease my students. But that's because I want to make them feel at ease. Oh, it's okay that you made a mistake. I may look at them and say, you made a mistake, okay? But everybody does, and we should all be able to laugh and learn at mistakes. Mistakes aren't bad things. So this whole thing here about being non-judgmental. I mean, I understand what they mean, but sometimes I think we go overboard. Anyway. Some features now related to this whole idea of comprehensible input, and then the inverse, the comprehensible output. We should have speech appropriate to students' proficiency levels. Again, that makes kind of sense. If you're trying to teach them, you should be teaching at language levels that they can understand. Otherwise, why are you there? Now, obviously, mainstream teachers aren't going to be that way. Mainstream teachers are going to be teaching to the main group, and they expect our students to fit in. And obviously, they're not going to, at least initially when they're here. So we want to provide that scaffolding. Okay? Now, a good mainstream teacher is going to try to recognize the student's needs and try to help them along if they're trained to do so. If they're not trained to do so, then that comes to you. You need to try to train them. Right? Provide clear explanation of the academic texts. Right? So you're going to walk through that text and make sure that they understand it. More importantly, I think, and this is maybe feature number 13 here in our list, is that we should provide ways to help them to learn to teach themselves, right? To give them the skills and strategies to become independent learners. And we're going to hit that later on, but as I'm looking at this whole comprehensible input, if they're being put into a class, a mainstream class, they should be learning these tricks early on. How to survive, how to take notes, how to write down these major concepts so they can come back later and ask questions and or get help. Right? Feature number 12 here, use a variety of techniques to make the concepts clear. And you'll see a whole bunch of non-literary ways to do this. Gestures, body language, objects, movies, PC, modeling, previewing, graphic organizers. Providing alternative response forms, different ways that they can answer, right? Give them multiple exposure. Flood them with all these different ways that you can try to help them understand what it is without actually specifically telling them either in English and or in their native language. And so there's not a focus on the linguistic element here, which in my opinion is the primary drawback of this approach. As I said before, comprehensible input, absolutely necessary. Comprehensible output, absolutely necessary. But we should also have a focus on language. And that's not listed here, and that's something that they should be adding into this whole SIOP model. Even with the SIOP model, where you have this sheltered instruction, okay? You're talking content, and you can give them shelter, but you also should have a language focus. After all, that's the primary thing that we should be teaching them, right? They're not going to learn merely by having this comprehensible input. Okay, they're going to need more than just that. They're going to need some focus on language, especially if they're going to get higher up in the language field. Okay, again, that's just my opinion. It's not what this book or this model is trying to show. That's the end of this chapter of comprehensible input. I do hope you understood the points that I was trying to make with regard to the benefits, and there are many benefits here to comprehensible input and comprehensible output, or forced output production. I mean, they're definite pluses to doing these things. Please bear in mind that, in my opinion, we also need to have a focus on literacy. It's not just my opinion, but people like Nation would also agree that forced output production, that language focus would be another element that needs to be done here. The real question is, how you balance them all. All right? And that's all for this chapter. If you do have questions, of course, you can catch me on email. You can catch me on the boards.